3 times in 1 year, a 13-year-old girl vanished from her own home. 3 times she came back. Then a car sat parked in the Hollywood Hills for a month, until someone finally asked what that smell was. Now there's blood. DNA. A defense nobody expected. This is the case against D4vd. Welcome back to True Crime Site. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover the cases everyone's talking about, and the ones nobody's told you about yet. Her name was Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Before any of this became a national story, she was just a kid from Lake Elsinore, California, a small city about 90 minutes outside Los Angeles. The kind of place where everybody sort of knows everybody. She went to Lakeland Village High School. Family described her as someone who loved Hello Kitty. She was even last seen wearing a pair of Hello Kitty slippers, according to the missing person flyer put up around her neighborhood. Small detail, but it's the kind of detail that reminds you she was still a kid in a lot of ways, even while she was being pulled into something far beyond her years. In 2024, Celeste was 13, a 7th grader, and that year, something started happening. She kept disappearing, not for a few hours, for days, sometimes longer. The first time was mid-February. Family members grew worried enough to file a missing person report. Flyers went up around the neighborhood. Her last known sighting was logged as February 14th. She came home. Then it happened again, and again. By the end of 2024, Celeste had been reported missing 3 separate times. Same pattern, every time. She'd vanish. Her family would panic, put up flyers, call police, wait. Eventually, she'd resurface, and life would go back to something resembling normal, at least on the surface. Nobody outside her immediate circle understood why. Here's what we know now, pieced together through court documents unsealed much later. According to prosecutors, Celeste and a singer named D4vd began a relationship in November of 2023. She was 13, he was 18, already a rising artist with a growing following online. Court filings allege that relationship was sexual from early on, something no adult should ever be involved in with a child. Over the following year, according to those same filings, Celeste reportedly spent significant time with him. Weekends at his home, trips that took her far outside anything a 13-year-old's life should normally include, to Las Vegas, to London, even to Texas, where she reportedly met his family. We're not going to speculate beyond what's been alleged and what's come out in court, but it's worth sitting with this for a second, because it's easy for a case like this to become about the accused, about the music, the fame, the courtroom drama. Celeste was a person first, a daughter, a student, a kid who was still figuring out who she was going to become. She never got the chance to. By April of 2025, she would be gone, not reported missing a 4th time, gone in a much more permanent way, one that wouldn't be discovered for months. That's where this story really starts to turn. To understand what happened between them, you first need to understand who he was becoming at the time. His real name is David Anthony Burke. Online, the world knew him as D4vd. He'd grown up in Texas, and by his late teens, his music had started to take off. Not through a label deal at first, but through the internet, the way a lot of careers start now. Clips of his songs spread on TikTok. Streaming numbers climbed into the billions. His breakout single, Romantic Homicide, came out in 2022. It's worth mentioning only because of what it's about. Dark, moody, violent imagery wrapped around a persona he called Itami. Millions of people loved it. Nobody thought twice about the themes. That's just what a lot of alternative music sounds like these days. By 2025, he wasn't just a TikTok name anymore. He was performing at Coachella. He had a world tour lined up. His debut album was on the way, and according to testimony later given in court, He was on track to earn more than $11 million. Around this same time, he was living in Los Angeles, alone. His family, his mother, his younger brother and sister, stayed behind in Texas. He was a teenager, living by himself for the first time, suddenly making real money, suddenly surrounded by people whose job it was to build his career. According to court filings, that's around the time he and Celeste crossed paths. She was 13, he was 18. We don't know the full details of how they met, but prosecutors allege that not long after, the relationship became sexual, repeatedly. Over time, there's also a detail worth noting here. She was photographed backstage at one of his shows in June of 2024, a small sign of how embedded she'd become in his world, months before anyone outside their circle understood what was actually happening. This is the part of the story that's hardest to sit with, and we're not going to dress it up. If the allegations are true, an adult man used his position, his fame, his resources, his access, to build something with a child that should never have existed in the first place. And here's what makes it even harder to process. While all of this was allegedly happening, his career kept climbing. More streams, more attention, a bigger following, a debut album on the way. The prosecution's theory is that this is exactly the problem. That Celeste knew what was going on. That she was, in their words, a threat to everything he'd built. A teenager who could end a career with one conversation, one screenshot, one phone call to the wrong person. That's the motive laid out in court so far. Not rage, not passion, protection of a brand, a reputation, a paycheck. We'll get into exactly how prosecutors say that motive played out. But first, it helps to sit with the shape of it. A girl who trusted an adult she should never have been alone with. A man whose entire public image depended on nobody finding out what he'd allegedly done. Those two realities were on a collision course, and in April of 2025, they collided. April 23, 2025. 2 days before D4vd's debut album was set to release. 2 days before Withered would drop and change his career for good. The night before, according to court filings, the two of them got into an argument. A long one, chronicled in text messages that would later become part of the prosecution's case. The fight, prosecutors say, centered on jealousy. Celeste reportedly upset over his relationships with other women. According to the filings, he'd led her to believe they had a future together. It's a detail that adds a different shade to everything else in this case. This wasn't framed, at least in that argument, as someone trying to walk away or expose a secret. It was framed as a teenage girl who believed she was in a real relationship, upset that it wasn't what she thought it was. The next night, prosecutors say, D4vd sent an Uber to pick her up in Lake Elsinore. It arrived at her home around 8:40 in the evening and brought her roughly 90 minutes north into the Hollywood Hills, arriving at his home a little after 10. We don't know everything that was said between them once she got there, but we do know this. That was the last time anyone heard from Celeste Rivas Hernandez. No more calls, no more texts, no more check-ins with friends or family. Whatever happened inside that house that night, it was the end of any trace of her being alive. This is where the case gets its most serious allegation. Prosecutors say David Burke killed her there shortly after she arrived, using a sharp object or objects to inflict the injuries that caused her death. Their theory is that he did it to stop her from exposing their relationship, right as his album was about to launch, right as his career was about to hit its biggest moment yet. It's important to say plainly, that is the prosecution's theory of the case. It has not been proven in a courtroom. Burke has pleaded not guilty, and his attorneys have said publicly that the evidence will show he did not cause Celeste's death. 2 days later, Withered came out anyway. Streams climbed. His profile grew. The world kept listening to his music, with no idea what investigators would later allege happened just before its release. For months, nobody knew Celeste was gone in any permanent sense. Her family had already grown used to her disappearing and coming home. This time, she just never came home. Somewhere in the Hollywood Hills, a house sat quiet, holding a secret nobody outside it knew existed yet. Neighbors walked past it. Life around it kept moving. That secret wouldn't come out through a phone call, a witness, or a confession. It would come out because of a smell nobody could explain. September 8, 2025. A black Tesla had been sitting in the same spot in the Hollywood Hills for over a month. Neighbors noticed it. Nobody moved it. Eventually, someone called it in as abandoned. A tow truck came and took it to a yard in Los Angeles. That's when someone working there noticed the smell. It wasn't faint. Whatever was causing it had been sitting in that car, in the heat, for weeks. When officers opened the front trunk, they found 2 bags. Inside them were human remains, dismembered, badly decomposed, a head and torso in one bag, arms and legs in the other. At that point, nobody in that tow yard knew whose body it was. The state of decomposition made a visual identification impossible. There simply wasn't enough left to recognize a face, a build, anything that could tell investigators who this had once been. It took about a week. Investigators worked through dental records, eventually confirming what they'd found. On September 16th, the remains were identified as Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She'd been missing, really missing, permanently missing, since that April night. Nobody had known. Her family had spent months without answers, without even knowing there was a body to look for. Investigators also noted something else during identification. A small tattoo, the word "she," inked onto her skin. It would later become one of several details tying her identity to the remains beyond doubt. The car belonged to David Burke. Once that name came back, the entire case shifted. This stopped being an unidentified set of remains in a random impound lot. It became a murder investigation, centered on one of the fastest rising names in music. 7 months after that April night, Celeste Rivas Hernandez finally had a name attached to what had happened to her. It would take several more months, and a great deal more evidence, before anyone would be formally charged. That evidence started in a garage. Once investigators had a name, they went looking for a paper trail. And they found one, under a name that wasn't his. According to charging documents, in the days and weeks after Celeste died, David Burke placed a series of online orders using the alias Victoria Mendez, delivered to his home 2 chainsaws, heavy-duty laundry bags, a body bag, a blue inflatable pool, a shovel, later, in July, a burn cage. None of these purchases happened before April 23rd. Every single one came after. That timing matters to the prosecution's case. They argue it shows a pattern, not a plan made in advance, but a scramble afterward to get rid of evidence. The defense sees it differently. If nothing was bought beforehand, they argue, doesn't that suggest this wasn't planned at all? Maybe something happened that night that nobody anticipated, including Burke himself. That argument would resurface again and again, once the case reached a courtroom. But before it got there, investigators had already gone back to the source, Burke's rented home in the Hollywood Hills, specifically the garage. What they found didn't need a witness to explain it. Using a chemical reagent that reacts to trace amounts of blood, criminalists sprayed down sections of the garage floor. Wherever blood might be present, the chemical glows blue under specific light. When they tested the area, the floor lit up, a wide stretch of blue, visible enough that people reviewing the photos later in court reportedly gasped. Underneath black rubber mats laid across the floor, blood had apparently seeped down into the brick underneath. More was found on a rowing machine, more on a Tesla charger plug, trash bags in the garage, double-bagged, held cleaning wipes stained with a substance that tested positive for the possible presence of blood. 2 chainsaws were recovered from that same garage. Tested for blood, both came back negative. A third chainsaw, ordered under that same alias, was never found at all. And in the middle of all of it, investigators found something nobody expected: jugs of fake blood. Prop blood, the kind used in music videos. Burke had used similar imagery in some of his own work. Tested, it came back negative, clearly unrelated to Celeste. But its presence in that garage, sitting alongside everything else, would become its own small subplot once this reached a courtroom. At this point, investigators had a body. They had a name. They had a garage that told a story on its own, without a single witness saying a word. What they still needed was the science to say, with real certainty, whose blood this actually was. In July of 2026, nearly a year after Celeste's remains were found, a Los Angeles courtroom finally began hearing this case out loud. This was a preliminary hearing, not a trial. The bar here is lower than what's needed to convict someone. Prosecutors only need to show probable cause, enough evidence that a reasonable person would believe a crime was likely committed, and that Burke likely committed it. Reporters who sat through the hearing day after day described the same thing, over and over. David Burke, in an orange jail uniform, largely unshaken, staring straight ahead, occasionally leaning in to whisper with his attorneys. A courtroom sketch artist, who's covered hundreds of criminal cases, was reportedly asked how his demeanor compared to other defendants she's drawn. Her answer, relayed secondhand, was that some observers in that courtroom had used a specific word to describe what they were seeing: sociopathic. The hearing wasn't without its own drama outside the evidence itself. At one point, a reporter was removed from the courtroom entirely, after the judge determined she'd violated rules around live reporting. Separately, a private investigator who'd been looking into the case independently was excluded from testifying after prosecutors said he'd violated grand jury secrecy rules. Neither of those moments changed the substance of the case, but they're a reminder of just how tightly controlled and how closely watched this hearing has been. The first major thread prosecutors laid out was motive. A financial manager testified that Burke's music career had already earned him over $11 million, with far more on the way. Prosecutors argue that number matters, that Celeste threatening to expose their relationship meant she was threatening to take all of it away. It's part of why this case carries a special circumstance allegation: murder committed for financial gain, one of the factors that makes Burke eligible for the death penalty if he's convicted. Then came the forensic evidence, and this is where the hearing really shifted gears. An laptop criminalist named Samantha Tosh took the stand to walk through DNA testing done on 27 separate locations across the Tesla and the garage. She'd built a reference profile using a toenail sample collected during Celeste's autopsy and compared it against blood recovered from the trunk of the car, the garage floor mat, the rowing machine, and the charger plug. Sample after sample, the results kept pointing the same direction. Red stains recovered from the lower compartment of the rear trunk matched Celeste's profile. So did a second sample from that same area. So did the stains on the rowing machine and the charger plug in the garage. The numbers she gave were almost impossible to picture. Some of the matches, she testified, were 1 septillion times more likely to have come from Celeste than from any unrelated person. Write that number out, and it's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. The partial profile recovered from the garage floor mat carried slightly lower odds, closer to 20 quadrillion, still statistically overwhelming, just based on a smaller amount of genetic material to work with. Sitting in that courtroom, Celeste's mother reportedly broke down crying as this testimony was given, doubled over at points, needing a tissue. A few feet away, Burke sat back in his chair, no reaction at all. But the defense wasn't finished. Burke's attorneys, led by Blair Burke, pushed hard on what DNA evidence can and can't actually prove. Under cross-examination, Tosh agreed that DNA testing can confirm someone's genetic material is present on an object, but it can't say how it got there, when it arrived, or what activity caused it to be transferred. She agreed. DNA can move indirectly between surfaces, something forensic scientists call tertiary transfer, and that it can sit on a surface for weeks, months, even years without breaking down. The defense used the rowing machine as their example. Celeste had reportedly spent time in that home before, on multiple occasions. Could her DNA have ended up there through nothing more than ordinary contact, completely unrelated to the night she died? Tosh agreed she couldn't say for certain, one way or the other. It's a real question, and one the prosecution will need to answer more fully if this case goes to trial. A number with 24 zeros behind it sounds definitive, but even overwhelming statistics can't answer the question of how, or when, or why. Next came the deputy medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho, who performed Celeste's autopsy. He testified that her remains weighed just 71 pounds by the time they were recovered, and that she still had her braces on, one of the details that helped confirm her identity alongside dental records. He testified that her official cause of death was multiple penetrating injuries, but he stopped short of saying she'd been stabbed with a sharp instrument specifically. The state of decomposition, he explained, made it impossible to rule out other causes entirely. Even, he admitted under questioning, a gunshot wound. That answer opened the door to the moment that turned heads in that courtroom. One of Burke's attorneys asked Dr. Ho directly, could he rule out that Celeste had inflicted those wounds on herself? He said no. Based on what the autopsy could show, he couldn't rule it out. It's worth being clear about what that means, and what it doesn't. This wasn't the medical examiner saying he believed that's what happened. It was a defense attorney testing the limits of what forensic science can and can't prove, and finding a gap in the record. Several people in that courtroom reportedly reacted with visible skepticism. This is a line of questioning, not a conclusion, but it's now part of the official record, and if this goes to trial, it's a question a jury will have to sit with too. As of the most recent hearing day, the judge still hasn't ruled on whether this case will move forward to trial, and on the most recent day of testimony, new details emerged that we haven't covered yet here. Details serious enough that they deserve their own full breakdown, rather than a rushed mention at the end of this video. We'll bring you that update the moment it's fully verified. This case is still unfolding in real time. The judge hasn't ruled yet. More testimony is still coming. What stays with me isn't the forensic detail or the courtroom drama. It's a 13-year-old girl who went missing 3 times before anyone truly understood why, and a system full of adults around her who didn't ask the right questions soon enough. If this story affected you, talk about it with someone. Sometimes just saying a case out loud with another person is what keeps you from carrying it alone. We'll be back with the next update as soon as it's confirmed. Until then, take care of yourselves.